Hey guys, MrPokke here, back with another video, and for today's episode of CN Pulling Opinions, we are going to be taking a look at the latest version 3.2 Castorice banner alongside with Anaxa, followed by the rerun banners of Fugue, Jiaoqiu, Acheron, as well as Dr. Ratio, right? So without further ado, let's get into today's content. Starting off with Castorice, she is going to be our HP summon anniversary DPS, which is going to be releasing around the same time as our previous anniversary DPS Acheron, right? There's honestly quite a lot of stuff to unpack for Castorice herself. She basically summons a giant dragon netherwing special energy HP burner mechanic, but I would be going a lot more in-depth into her on the upcoming Wednesday for the early access review, right? So roughly speaking, from the live stream itself, her skill does a joint attack with netherwing, so it is going to be quite likely that without netherwing that should be a weaker version. And then for her ultimate, she summons netherwing at 100% action value advance, allowing it to take action immediately. And then the talent is going to be charging her ultimate when our allies lose HP. It also increases the damage for the HP loss or when the HP is going to be recovered from the dragon. So this is going to be Castorice's special mechanic, which means that she is not going to be gaining any form of energy through conventional means, very similar to Acheron as well as Face Out, right? And then for technique, she summons netherwing at the start of battle. And one very important thing before we go into the dragon itself is going to be her global passive. It essentially acts like a mini Bailu, where the characters that would have been down, they will come back into this sort of like this state where they need to be healed or shielded at the start of their next turn, otherwise they would be down immediately, right? So that's gonna be the global passive. And then for netherwing itself, it's gonna be doing blast damage scaling depending on how much HP does the dragon's attack consume, and at the same time the allies cannot die as long as netherwing can take damage for your allies. And during this duration, when the dragon finally leaves the field, then it will heal all allies at the same time. And at this point in time, her supplementary 4 stars are going to be Pella, Gallagher, as well as Lynx, which I would say that this current anniversary banner has a very strong lineup of 4 stars, which are going to be exceptional for pretty much any free-to-play light spenders that have not gotten their hands on at least, let's just say, a E6 Gallagher in their respective cases, right? And then for the verdict overall for casters, CM believes that if you do not have a V3 DPS, says that is going to be, say, if you do not have D Herta, you do not have Agleia, you do not have Maide, you skip every single V3 DPS, then her pool value is going to be a 10 out of 10. Otherwise, it's just going to be at a 7 out of 10. So they believe that as a anniversary unit, Castorice's value is going to be at least on par, if not higher than the version 3 DPS counterparts. But she is not a default mass pool unit just because of a anniversary banner or even because of the global passive. And if the players have already pulled for any of the V3 DPS, namely D Herta, Agleia, as well as Maide, then her value would be essentially competing with these 3 different scenarios. So for example, if you already pull for D Herta, pulling for Castorice is going to lead to an opportunity cost, which means that you might not have enough to get Anaxa. And between Castorice and Anaxa, it is going to be quite likely that since he is a wind erudition unit, he should scale quite nicely with D Herta. So for players that already want to vertically advance to a D Herta team, Castorice may be detracting that from their original goal, right? And then for your Agleia pullers, you are essentially pulling Agleia with a team comp of Robin, Sunday, and Huo, assuming that you already have the best in sort team comp. But I'm not exactly sure if Castorice is gonna be using the exact same teammates. But if you're not using the exact same teammates with Agleia, that means that you can technically still use Agleia in team 1, but then you would need to complete a separate team 2 for Castorice, which means that players that are under this camp, you would have put for Sunday, you would have put for Agleia, you would have gotten Robin from either the rerun or the previous time you put for Robin, which means that if you did pull for Castorice, chances are you are going to be quite tight on Stellar Jace as a low spend or free to play, depending or not if you put 3B early enough. So if you did not obtain 3B, it means that you essentially have to tie Castorice up with RMC, which is going to be Mimi, and as well as any of the older supports such as your Bronya, Sunday, Sparkle, all that kind of stuff, which would see maybe the performances might not be as optimal, but I'll talk about it a little bit more in the creator experience server, right? And one last thing, which is going to be the Maide pullers, right? If you really pull for Maide, there is a potential chance of running both Castorice and Maide in the same team, because they have mentioned that the charge gain is going to be from your allies losing HP, and we know know by now, Maide does lose quite a bit of HP because that is going to be Bro's entire kit, right? But as of this current point of time, it is also going to be in a little bit of a similar situation with Tribi, which is if you already pull for Maide and you pull for Tribi, it means that there is an entire version 3.1 where you have put both limited 5 stars back to back, and that's assuming that you did not pull for that signature like codes. So do you still have enough to get up enough to secure a E0S0 Castorice, or maybe even E0S1 or even E2S1 if you want to go for a little bit more vertical investments, right? So that is going to be up to you. However, if you are not falling into any of these 3 camps, which is to say you skipped all 3 version 3 DPS, that is going to be D, Herta, Aglaia, as well as Maide, then Castorice would have an extremely high value because she essentially almost has no competition. She's going to be a very direct upgrade compared to a lot of our version 2 archetypes because as we know by now, HSR, every single time a brand new team comes out, maybe the character kit might not be that insanely good to changes everything, but at least we know for a fact that the end game content they are going to be tailoring to the main team, right? So that's going to be that. And for the global passive specifically, I've shown you guys previously on what the CN opinions think about the HSR 3.2 live stream. CN doesn't seem too worried about Castorice herself's global passive, right? Because in practice, the global passive on Castorice is going to be more impactful for players that are running sustainless or going for the 0 cycles. It technically saves you that one potential reset if you're able to defeat the opponent within a period of time. If you're already running a sustain in the first place, it gives you this added comfort, this added quality of life. So maybe you can have this emergency Bailu heal, but it might not be as necessary as players might think it is, right? So at the end of the day, even though they don't think Castorice's global passive might change everything, they do share a similar concern, which is what if more and more global passives and more global passives they can stack with one another was to be introduced in the future, right? So that is gonna be that for Castorice's pooling value. And now jumping into Anaxa, he is going to be our weakness implant support / hybrid DPS. So his kit is essentially locking in 7 different weaknesses, a potential personal damage with a single target bounce, as well as a free skill trigger during the ultimate state sublimation, right? So for his basic attack, it is not that important by itself, but it is going to be tied to the talent review in the live stream, which can allow Anaxa to be skill point positive depending on how frequently can he cast his ultimate. For his skill, it's going to be a single target plus a 4 target bounce, which means that if you are going to be using Anaxa in a single target scenario, he would be able to deal more damage to a single target compared to a AoE scenario, right? And then for the ultimate, it's going to be the sublimation state, applying all 7 weaknesses at the same time. And finally, for the talent, every single time Anaxa deals damage, it will apply 1 random weakness. And if you have enough weaknesses applied to the enemy target, then he would deal additional damage. For all Anaxa's basics and trigger during this sublimation state, it will basically trigger a free 0 skill point skill, which means that unless we are going to be facing a ultimate shortfall because he is going to be using basic attacks, he can be most likely extremely skill point positive, which does translate into a very high chance that he is going to be the brand new evolution slot that will be paired with D Herta, because one of D Herta's potential flaws is she might not deal that well with single target because she cannot charge up the energy and she cannot charge up the charges for the ultimate, right? Whereas for Anaxa, his kit does seem to excel against a single target because of the bounce mechanic, right? So rest in peace, Zero Wolf, he does have the potential to be a main or sub DPS depending on his multipliers, his skill point positivity, as well as any unreviewed utility within the live stream. For Anaxa's 4-star, however, is going to be 4-star Dunhing, Saval, and Mose, which frankly speaking is definitely nowhere near as comparable to Castorice's 4-star banners, right? So if you guys are thinking about building pity, you could try, but definitely take note of the risks involved. And then for the verdict for Anaxa, if you're going to be a D Herta main, it's going to be a 9 out of 10. Otherwise, it's going to be a little bit indecisive because CM believes that Anaxa's kit is going to need more clarity on what exactly sort of utility as well as the damage Anaxa himself can provide to the entire team, on top of what we have seen so far, the weakness implant as well as the single target damage within the bounce mechanic, right? Because as of this point, D Herta is most likely going to be the best complement for Anaxa because like I mentioned just now, she's not going to be doing too well against a single target scenario, and Anaxa does seem to fill up this slot very nicely. And we did see that he has a free skill usage. He's most likely going to be not as skill point heavy compared to our other erudition supports, and a very strong replacement to the current 4-star erudition lineups like Saval or Baby Herta or even potentially Jade. But at the end of the day, it really depends on Anaxa's utility as well as his personal damage. So whether or not this weakness implant, which we have seen from the live stream, is gonna be a game-changing mechanic, it will depend on the enemy design and whether or not this weakness implant includes a rest down just like Silverwolf. Because as we know by now, even if you were to implant a weakness similar to how Firefly and even Boothill can implant a false fire or physical weakness, it doesn't necessarily bring down the resistance of the enemy to the set element, which means that if you do not have this rest down, the damage itself is not going to change. You're basically only dealing toughness bar damage, which will allow your team to basically break the enemy a little bit faster, which technically has a little bit more of a higher multiplier against a weakness broken target, but it is not the end all be all compared to a implanted weakness with the rest down such as Silverwolf, right? So if it's just for the sake of toughness bar damage or the weakness break itself, it might not be that significant, especially without any forms of other buffs and debuffs. And then that is gonna be that for Anaxa and Castorice. And now jumping into the rerun banners, we basically have a Fugue, Jiaoqiu, Acheron in the first half, as well as a Doctor ratio for the second half. Now at this one, I'm just gonna say straight up, the CN community basically thinks Doctor ratio is an easy skip. You don't really have to think about it whatsoever, so don't really need to concern at all. Just think about whether you want to pull for any of the reruns in the first half, which are going to be Fugue, Jiaoqiu, as well as Acheron. Now between these three units, Fugue is gonna be having a slightly higher priority compared to Jiaoqiu, which is gonna be having a higher priority compared to Acheron. Now, for Fugue and Jiaoqiu, this argument, both of them, they are considered as core supports to Super Break and the Acheron team comp respectively, which we have seen since version 2. They have been able to perform exceptionally well for all of our endgame contents, essentially throughout the entire version last time, and even in version 3, even though they might not compare as well compared to the version 3 archetypes, they are still able to perform more or less quite consistently, even if it's not going to be the best of the best of the best team, right? So for players who were already building Super Break, right, you were already building up your Fugue, you're already building up your Rame, you want to build up your Rappa or Firefly or Boothill, this Fugue's inclusion in Super Break is going to be a very decent upgrade because you basically have no other units that can fulfill what Fugue has to offer in a Super Break team. Whereas for the Acheron team, this is also going to be very similar, which is the same vein as aside from Jiaoqiu, no other nihility units we have access right now can generate as many stacks compared to Jiaoqiu. But for both of them, if you already missed out for Super Break, right? If you're not pulling for Super Break, if you're not pulling for Acheron for the past 2 or 3 patches, or you start out playing Honkai Star within this patch and you do not have any intention of building Super Break or building Acheron, then both of them don't really hold that much value, right? You can just look forward into the version 3 DPS as we go into the future. Now, for Fugue specifically, and why CN feels that Fugue has a slightly higher value compared to Jiaoqiu, it's basically dependent on 2 reasons. The first reason being we have been drip marketed teased to be another nihility unit, quantum nihility, that is going to be Cypher, right? So we know by now, Quantum as a nihility, they do not have DOT because Entanglement is not counted as a damage overtime, which means that it is quite likely this is going to be a debuffer that would improve our damage outputs. Very similar to how Silverwolf is going to be acting. So in that sense, there may be a potential risk where Cypher could compete with Jiaoqiu. But let's just say if Cypher does not compete with Jiaoqiu and can run both of them in the same team, especially for an E0 Acheron running a sustain, then that wouldn't be that big of a problem. But then brings us to a second potential issue with Jiaoqiu, which can be seen from our current endgame content being Nicanor as well as the Flame Breather coming up the next MOC12, which is representing on the mobs themselves spawned by the bosses. They don't move, which we can see from the spears from Nicanor as well as the Flame Breather's clones. None of them actually take any action. One of the biggest problems, or rather bigger benefits for Jiaoqiu to Acheron is that he can generate a lot of stacks whenever the enemy takes action during their turn. So that is one whole slash dreams every single time an enemy takes action. In an environment like Pure Vision last time for Acheron, it would have performed very well because the more turns the enemy take, the more slash dreams Acheron get. But because these summons from the bosses, they literally do not move at all, Jiaoqiu actually loses a lot of potential for generating slash dreams, which means that his effectiveness as a unit is going to be impeded because of these enemy designs. Compared to Fugue, she doesn't really have any ways where it's shaped by the environment that much. Unless the enemy themselves, they are straight up toughness locked and they cannot be weakness broken, every single Super Raid team is still going to be using the same formula of breaking the toughness bar as soon as possible, and Fugue's exo toughness plus super break all in one is going to be offering you a lot of value, especially if you decided to play a sustained team for super break as you took out Harmony Trailblazer to give it into Remembrance Trailblazer, right? So between the two, if players are already locked into both Acheron and super break, if you're thinking which one of them is a more stable upgrade for value, then I would say Fugue does place higher compared to Jiaoqiu, right? So that's going to be that between the Fugue and Jiaoqiu analysis, and this brings us to Acheron herself as a DPS, which is going to be our previous anniversary DPS unit. So we have the strongest anniversary last time as well as the current strongest anniversary unit today, right? So CN do believe that unfortunately Acheron has a low priority compared to all of the other reruns, because based on the environment as well as enemy mechanics, it would take more investments for older units, even like Acheron, to perform on par, if not better than a version 2 DPS. That has been the case ever since version 1. Whenever these new units, new archetypes comes out, the endgame content as well as the enemy bosses, they are tailor-made to make the brand new version 3 perform better. So unless players really love Acheron, you love her design, you love her lore, and you want her to exceed in performance, making them comparable to a version 3 DPS or a version 3 team comp, then players can go ahead and decide to go all in for Acheron, right? It could be an E0 S1, E2 S1, or even E6 S1 Acheron. So with that being said, if it's strictly from like a baseline perspective and you're thinking of should I be pulling for Acheron or should I be pulling for Castorice, then Castorice is gonna be very hard to justify being worse than Acheron. That is gonna be the verdict for all of them. And just to touch on a little bit, I hope that you guys watch this other video, I'm not sure when this is gonna be posted, which is how should you be choosing the token for your run Mei, Luocha, as well as playing around with the brand new 50-50 PD system to basically maximize the chances of you instead of just going through the normal of just removing the standard 5-star, right? So within this route, I would say this technically plays a pretty interesting role for all of our pulling opinions going forward, because now we know for a fact that these 5-star units, previous 5-star limited units like your Scylla, Blade, Fuxuan, Luanmei, even Luocha, they can have an opportunity to be given to the players without spending strategies, which I would say quite drastically reduce a value of a rerun, especially when these reruns, they are going to be running in conjunction with all of the brand new banners, which every single time they are basically providing the perfect environment to make all these new banners perform to the best of their capabilities, right? So with that regard, do take it with a pinch of salt and be a little bit more wary. Don't just go all in for Ramen or Luocha. Otherwise, I would say saving all these tokens for maybe one day these units also appear in the brand new shop, then I wouldn't be too surprised as well, right? So with that, we have come to the summary of this entire topic. The highest DPS value, especially if you did not pull for a V3 DPS at all, it's going to be Castorice. And if you're going to be a D Herta main and you want to vertically invest to D Herta, then Anaxa is going to be excellent choice. Then there are going to be two potential witnesses. For Castorice, she will still be in competition with other DPSs. For the current V3, for the future V3, or even the future V4, V5, V6, as we have seen from now in HSR, every single DPS will go through the rite of passage, which is going to be the competition with other DPSs, especially compared to your supports and sustains, at least to a higher degree, right? So even if Castorice herself does have this global passive, number one, her own global passive is not going to be that game-changing, and number two, she is at the end of the day still a DPS. So do take that with a pinch of salt, especially if you think she's going to be a mass pull unit, because frankly speaking, she's not going to be a mass pull, right? So that is going to be for Castorice. And then for Anaxa, if another erudition unit with more utility than Witness and Plant is going to be introduced, then he's going to be directly competing with that set erudition unit, because for Herta, you only need a single erudition to make her complete the entire team comp. For Acheron, at least you can have two utility, so it's a little bit more flexibility, but the moment you unlock or spend your strategies for a erudition unit like Anaxa, then in the future, if there were going to be more erudition units coming out, can you pivot away Anaxa to be a main DPS by himself? Be a little bit more prepared that if stronger erudition support units for Dioda were coming out, be prepared that Anaxa may or may not be either bench or pivot into a team too, right? So that are going to be the witnesses. And with that, we have come to the final conclusion. We are essentially approaching a brand new era of pulling opinions in honkaistarrail, right? Because at the end of the day, for Castorice, this global passive, it is going to be here to stay. And only the future would know how many more global passive and how global passives stack with one another is going to be, right? So this will definitely impact the pulling opinions going forward. But at the end of the day, players, you are only given 90 to 100 pulls per patch. So the fundamental benchmark, especially for players that are struggling with endgame content because the team is not strong enough, building a strong team still remains the #1 priority over obtaining global passives. It doesn't really matter if you obtain 1, 2, 3 global passives if your core team are still gonna be very, very poor. You don't have enough support, you don't have enough relics, you want to level your tracer, all that kind of stuff. As long as you build up this strong team, think of global passive as the sprinkle on the cake and not the cake itself, where you want to get it before building up a strong team, right? So with that, we have come to the end of today's content. Look forward to the C server, especially for Castorice, which is going to be coming out very, very soon. Word of the day is going to be not a mass pool. Join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join Twitter, join Twitter. All the best. Welcome to Pool. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.